Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Speak, Lead, Connect, the show where voices spark vision, leadership drives legacy, and authentic stories inspire action. I'm your host, Lorilet Monegro, and today I am beyond thrilled to welcome a powerhouse in tech leadership and human capital innovation, Renee Victoria Rivera. Renee is a senior vice president at the Bank of New York Mellon in the corporate engineering department. As a product owner in technology, she's at the forefront of driving automation and human centered solutions across the enterprise. With a master's in organizational psychology from Baruch's Zicklin School of Business, a bachelor in sociology from Hunter College, and certifications as a Scrum Master and Safe Agile practitioner, she's a rare blend of systems thinker, people strategist, and purpose driven leader. Today, we're diving into the intersection of tech, psychology, leadership, and purpose. Renee, welcome to Speak, Lead, Connect.
Thank you, Lorilet. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's like my pleasure is triple. I am so honored that you actually accepted to be interviewed because I know that everybody's busy. People don't want to be bothered. And, when people such as yourself who are busy doing important work say yes to the opportunity of having these conversations and opening up the path for others to understand how you have accomplished what you have accomplished as a woman and in these fields that are I'm going to say more challenging, and also given our Hispanic background, which can many times be a stigmatizing issue as opposed to something that opens doors for us. So thank you.
No, thank you. I'm excited.
Okay, so without further ado, we're going to start our interview, and the interview will begin first for us to kind of get a little more of an idea about who you are. So I'm going to ask you a little bit about yourself, like what inspired your journey into technology and leadership, because you have these two mixtures within a corporate setting.
So I kind of stumbled across the career, if I'm honest with you. So, as you can see, you mentioned in my bio, I didn't go to school for technology, and my certifications are in technology, but I really started off in, you know, going to Hunter College, and my path there was in sociology, and I thought I wanted to be a social worker. That's what I thought I wanted to do. And upon a little bit before finishing school, I worked in a few internships within the social setting, and I realized that it really wasn't something that was my calling. I really didn't enjoy doing. I mean, I enjoyed the aspect of helping people, but it wasn't really what I felt like I wanted to do. Um, and so I to be honest with you, I really wasn't even sure how to segue out of that. And so when I graduated from school, um, what I did was I went into human resources. So I got a job, um, doing more like at the time it was called generalist work, like HR generalist work. And I started working within human resources because with sociology, it's very easy to kind of segue into, you know, um, human resources. And so I started doing human resources and did a few jobs within human resources, which landed me a job in a bank called Credit Suisse, which was a Swiss international bank. And I was supporting technology, but I was in human resources at the time. And um, the person that I was working for, funny enough, I used to work with her, not for her, but I used to work with her in another company that had worked in which was Avon products. So I used to work in the corporate office there. And funny enough, this lady was now working at Credit Suisse. And although it was an assignment, because it was a long-term assignment, the assignment was ending at some point, and the people that I supported within technology really liked my work. And so the person that I was reporting to, told my stakeholders, hey, listen, Renee's assignment's going to end in about 2 weeks. So anything that you need, let her know right now so that she could service you, because I'm not going to be able to fill the role. And so those stakeholders, told this person that like I mentioned, that I worked with, hey, do you think Renee would want to work in technology? And the funny thing is that I always wanted to work in technology, but I didn't know how to segue into it.
Mhm.
When I thought about technology, all I could think about was writing code, being a coder. And that wasn't really what interests me. I wanted to do something within technology because computers always interest me. Um, but again, I didn't know how to segue in. And so that was my segue, where the person that said, hey, do you think that she would like technology, said, to my manager at the time, we're willing to train her. Like, we're looking for just good people. We're willing to train her. So if she wants to come in, you know, we're willing to train her. And that's exactly what happened. My assignment ended. They offered me a full-time job within the bank doing project management. And that's where my career started in technology. And I was placed under a gentleman who was Scottish, but he really like he was an actual geek, computer geek. He started his career coding, and he kind of segued into more of a line management role, project management. And he said, I'm going to take you under my wing and I'm going to teach you everything I know. And basically that's exactly what he did. He threw me on the trading floor. So I we were so I at in that role I was supporting the traders from a technology perspective. And he's like, I just want you to sit on the trading floor for 2 months and just learn everything about stocks and convertible bonds and options and derivatives. I just want you to learn the business. And once you learn the business, then I'll apply, the project management methodologies, because it's going to be very easy once you know your audience and you know the business. And so, um, yeah, 15 years later, I'm still in the field, and I've just jumped and done different roles, from project management to a little bit of business analysis to what I'm doing now, which is more of a product owner role.
Oh my goodness. I absolutely love this journey because this journey, one, speaks of what happens when people are willing to pour into us. So we could be literally someone who people might think, oh, they won't make it, but someone takes us under their wing, pours into us because they see the hunger, the desire to do and to be and to have more, and that willingness to apply ourselves in something. And wow, then you actually do make it. You see, because you're sharing something that I think is very powerful from the multiple perspectives of not only the different of situations of the people that helped you and your willingness, but also that ability of not having a degree in something and actually mastering it, and the power of observation and knowing your audience. You gave so much good content just in answering that question. And I'm hoping that our viewers and listeners are able to realize the value of just what you just explained. um, would have been impossible to anyone who didn't know what you would become, right? So, what we can become when we put ourselves to the task. Now, I know that you have actual studies in organizational psychology. So, and in this podcast, I usually like to talk also about that impact, of leaders like in their field. How how does your background in organizational psychology and sociology shape your approach as a leader in tech, right? Because you're dealing with all kinds of issues, people, and I'm sure, there are interesting things that come out um, in interactions. So, could you share a little bit about how maybe that has shaped some of that leadership aspect?
Yeah, I think it's helped me a lot. I mean, so one thing I could say is that within technology, for the most part, I think it's a lot of people know it's a male driven industry for the most part, right? They're not. It's a fact that there's a disparity between women and men within technology. So with that being said, I think that with my background in sociology and organizational psychology, I really learned about how to manage people, meaning, and I don't mean that from me being this in the standpoint of being their manager, but meaning managing their personality, learning, like taking the time to learn about them. One thing I noticed is that, um, sometimes in the workplace, people are misunderstood because people don't take the time to get to know that person, right? And let me give you an example, right? Um, sometimes, you get an email from someone and they didn't even greet you. They kind of go straight to the point, like, what's the timeline on this? Or when are you going to get this done? Blah, 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 right? Whereas, other people will be like, hi, Lorilet, can you please advise on the timeline of this? Thank you, right? And so I think my background has helped me to kind of get the information that I need, but also build a relationship with that person because most of the time when I'm reaching out to someone, it's not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing relationship that I'm gonna have with this person that I'm gonna need information from them, or they're gonna need information from me, or maybe they're a stakeholder, right? Or I need something from them besides information. So I think it's for me, the best way is to really build relationships with people because it's going to just make your job much easier, especially when it comes into the realm of what I do, project management and product ownership, right? I'm gathering information from people, and with that information is what I'm either reporting on or letting my stakeholders know, like, this is where we're at. So it's in my best interest to build a relationship with someone and have a good relationship with them so that we can continue to work together, and do great things.
Mm. So I hear from what you're saying how just having this awareness, like what this training has done for you in your career, is really make you this aware listener, mindful, present in the moment, but also filtering the different types of personalities that would come your way so that you may be uh, able to manage any issues and also avoid unnecessary conflict. So I think that part of it is not only, I guess, your attunement into who they are and the different needs and all that, and meeting those needs, like, oh, okay, let me be this very fine-tuned individual, but also understand when they might be really stressed by the different deadlines, by the different things, and that sometimes they might quickly answer not because they're not interested in greeting, but maybe because they're like, what's the deadline on this? Like, give me a hard number or a hard date because I need to know if I have wiggle room. And I think one thing that would be missing in terms of how you expose this, and I don't mean this as a critique, but I think the idea of trust,
Hmm.
this idea that you would trust that each time, whether the person greeted you or not, when, let's say, in asking you, give me a timeline, that they meant well, meaning they meant to meet the need as opposed to, oh, they're so uh, angry or whatever, which might be more of an inner perception and judgment than really the reality.
Hmm.
So this is actually a gold nugget for whoever's listening, right? In terms of management skills, people skills,
Mhm.
communication skills, general awareness. Um, I really am appreciating the way you've answered this question. So thank you for that.
Good.
Um, now, you also have your background as a Latina, and I think that it this is one of those things where you mentioned before that you're in a male dominated, so this is more like the gender piece. But
Mhm.
then you layer on not just that you're a woman. That's one issue that makes you different.
Right.
But as a Latina in this corporate technology bubble, world that you're in, how has your identity influenced your voice, your path, your leadership style? Because I'm assuming, and at a risk, right, that being Latina in an otherwise non-Latino environment also comes with its biases.
Mhm. Mhm.
So this is why I ask you this question, like, how does Latina identity, right, in that corporate tech, two
Mhm.
two areas, corporate and tech, has shaped and influenced, right, that identity influence your voice, your path, your leadership style, because how are you showing up? Like, I'm
Right.
curious.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think about my background as being raised by immigrants, right? And so, you know, I was raised as you got to work hard, you got to do more. So you can't just do what they're asking you to do. You got to do above and beyond and more so that you can make sure that you're labeled as valuable, right? Because just doing status quo, just regular, it's not going to cut it. Because we're almost, I'm not saying that this is the case. I'm just saying how I was specifically raised. It was more as because I'm Latina, I need to overcompensate a little bit more.
Mhm,
And people are
mhm.
going to assume that I don't have the competency to understand, right? Or assume that I don't have maybe the education, right? And assume that I cannot measure up. So you have to work harder to show or disprove this.
Yes, a hidden bias that could be there. And now that you mention this, I'm going to take a moment to really actually insert something here which reflects this concept. I'm going to speak for myself. Like, one of the things that I would get as I was, rising up as a younger woman in, education and all that, and, my reports, how I would write them or how I would communicate ideas or different things that I would do, I would get these. It's almost as if they were trying to compliment me, but I wasn't sure if that was really, like, if it landed as a compliment more as it exposed the bias. But they would say, "Oh, you speak really well."
Mhm,
And I was almost like, a few times I would go and say, "What do you mean by that?"
mhm,
As opposed to, "What did you expect?" Kind of thing. Um, but sometimes, you kind of just save your graces and you just kind of stay quiet and, not even say thank you, just kind of stay quiet. But people don't realize how they expose their biases, but
mhm,
that's sort of like the way it happens. And so I was always tasked with the same concept as you. Hey, you go to school, you're going to pay attention and you're going to do the best job you can, the best grades you can, and it was not a competition with anyone.
mhm,
But similar to you, this idea that, hey, if you want to distinguish yourself, you can't, I'm going to use this word, half ass your way
mhm,
there,
mhm,
because it's not going
mhm.
to happen.
Exactly.
Um, so the standards are above high
Exactly.
for us as Latina women.
Exactly. And then on top of at least for me, is don't call out sick. You go to work sick, you tough it out. You take your allocated vacation, no extra. outside of what they're giving you. Like if you call out sick, you have to be dying, literally dying if you call out
Yes.
sick. Otherwise, you tough it up, you go to work sick and you wait for 5 o'clock and you leave, but at least you made it. You showed up and you did the job for the day.
Yes, it's so interesting, but it's true. All these things I also grew up hearing that, you
Mhm.
know, and it's almost like that sense of fear and lack of agency, and that you also are a collaborator in the work. Um, So it's very interesting. And I think that that's more like the tainting of the identity, and how our Latina roots also kind of show up in there. So when it comes to leadership, though, if you think about, so that may have influenced a little bit of your path, where you were like, okay, I got to produce, 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 and I got to show up, show up, show up, even when I don't feel like it, right? Or when I'm not necessarily having the best health. But what about leadership style when it comes to actually leading a group of people through a project, or a situation, or a team's approach? How do you think that has impacted you, your identity?
I think, like my style when it comes to leadership is really like leading by example. I'm not gonna, you know, I was raised by my grandparents, right? And so they wouldn't just say something to me and then expect me to do it, but they didn't do it themselves. They would do it and then they would be like, you need to do this because this is what I do and this is what works for me, right? And it's going to work for you. And so I kind of adopted that lead by example. Like, yes, I'm telling you that this is what you need to do, but I'm also going to do it myself so I could prove to you and say to you that it works, and
Mhm.
I'm not going to be quote unquote hipocrita and tell you to do it, but I'm not going to do it.
Right, right. That was very good thought, which people who are listening can then realize and also reflect, how are they showing up and how might they want to improve, to lead by example and not just place a demand on a group of people that they might be either managing or leading. And I think that that's good in terms of authenticity and being able to align, right, the inner core of identity with the output. And that means you're incongruent, as opposed to incongruent.
Mhm,
And I think that sometimes we don't necessarily right away get that that's also part of why the success, because people see and can trust that you're going to deliver.
mhm,
So thank you for exposing, like all these back ends to how this leadership aspect permeates, even when we are not necessarily fully aware that that's
mhm,
the case. It is my hope that our listeners can catch on that and reflect too for themselves.
mhm,
Now, when I was looking at your uh, description that you shared, and you mentioned that basically you operate at the intersection of this tech and human capital aspect, um, because of what you're doing at the corporate level. But what does it mean to create automation with empathy? Like being able to automate tasks, but yet have this empathy. How are you able to merge those ideas?
So basically when my bio talks about that, what my bio is really saying is that I'm in technology, but my stakeholders and who I support are HR professionals, right? So with that being said, right, on my end, on the technology end, right, I do a lot of testing, right? So my team does the development of the work, right? And I'm just going to break it down to a smaller level, so that everybody can understand. If we have an so for example, if we have an application, right? One of the applications we have within the bank is called Oracle. It's where people can put in their vacation time, put in their sick time, see their paycheck stub, right? So that is an example of an application that is belongs to our human capital department, right? HR.
Mhm.
But my team, we built that, right? We built that application from the ground up, right? And so when I'm testing it, I'm looking at the human experience out of it, right? Is it
Mm.
easy, right? If I want to find my paycheck stub, I want a box that says pay stub or something that is going to alert me. I don't want to have to go into 5 different tabs to figure out where my paycheck stub is, right?
Awesome.
I want it to be easy. You think about let's just say whatever application you have on your phone for banking, Bank of America or Chase or Wells Fargo, right? You want to make a transfer, right? From your checking to your savings. You want it to be easy, right? You want it to
Yes.
be a 20-second task.
Yes.
You go in, you transfer the money, you hit close and
Yes.
log off and end of story.
Yes.
Same thing with the applications that we build. I want it to be easy. I want it to be user friendly. I want it to be for those people that maybe don't know the computer that well, maybe, and they
Mhm.
work for the bank and it's not really their thing,
Mhm.
or someone that is really, tech savvy and definitely knows. I want it to be a user friendly experience. And so that's how I put the empathy in it, right? I'm doing the testing and I'm saying like this 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 box shouldn't be here on the left. It should be on the right, or it
Right.
shouldn't be down. It should be up.
Right, because I see what you're doing is you're gathering the experience of how to make it more intuitive so that the person basically can do it with their eyes closed because this is what they would naturally gravitate into the next best action. So I really appreciate you sharing that because from context, I wouldn't have really fully gotten the grasp of how you actually were achieving such a feat. But as I see you kind of walk us because I was going to ask you to walk us through kind of like what that would look like in a project, and you basically kind of did that. But now as I was hearing you talk about this impact, right, of technology in terms of its usefulness and its ease of
Mhm.
access and transactions being made like at the click of a button because things are very clearly delineated. But now I'm thinking, how do you ensure, right, that automation and technology truly support people instead of replacing them? And I say this because we're now in the age of artificial intelligence.
Mhm.
And a lot of what we have done up to now in recent times, I'm going to say the last 3 or 4 years, we're not as heavy duty in your face artificial intelligence exposed to the masses.
Mhm.
Artificial intelligence has been around for a long, long time as a concept. But in terms of its implementation and application, we all know that now it's widespread. And so I'm just thinking, like, really, how do you in the process of creating these automations also secure that you're not replacing that human capital, right?
Mhm.
How are you kind of doing that?
That's a good question. So if I'm frank, yeah, we are definitely, and when I say we, I mean the world of technology, we're moving towards big things really fast with AI. There are going to be, there's going to be technology that is created that will eliminate people's jobs, being 100%, transparent with that. But before we get there, I think what I see, at least with my company and from, seeing within the banking industry where I think it's going for right now is the path is how do we make people's jobs easier and remove that manual tasks that people are doing. How do we remove that? How do we strategically um give them more time back in their day, right? So let's just say you spend 2 hours on a report, and because you have to do the report manually for whatever reason, you know the first goal would be for AI to streamline that report. And maybe instead of you spending 2 hours on that report, maybe you spend 30 minutes on the report, right? That's the path that I'm seeing that it's going, at least in my in the bank that I work at for right now, streamlining.
Hmm.
But I think that as we evolve within I think, most likely there will be, after the streamlining is all done, right? And that might take a lot of time, depending on the motivation of the organization to get the streamlining done. Um, Most likely it'll probably start to, eliminate jobs, maybe not a whole population, but maybe instead of 10 people doing this job, maybe we only need 5 people doing this job.
Right, right. And I can see how that also would make sense given the uh rate of speed, right? The speed in which automations and artificial intelligence can consume and digest and process vast amounts of information, whether that be of numeric value or alphabetic type of letters and numbers. And I think that because of its capacity to be so highly organized and sorting and doing all these tasks that honestly would take us so much more in terms of cognitive load. um well, it is my hope that companies do also begin to think about the human capital, right? How that displacement needs to be met with some kind of buffer and, prepare either a new set of skill set or start creating conditions that allow people to collectively
Mhm.
benefit from the streamlining and the artificial intelligence, so that there is something such as universal basic income that then supports people who are displaced without it being a burden, but more a commonwealth for society to share in the benefits of artificial intelligence that is being trained by all of us while we use it. But I don't know that there is such a consciousness or conversations happening around the idea that this is all being built around collective inputs of information from the entire world, and that the entire world's stake is on the items versus individual ownership or versus particular companies having their stakehold because they are monetary investors, as opposed to seeing this for what it is, that it will eventually be a source of sustenance if they so choose to, right?
Right.
Depends what they feed. um
I agree. I
but
agree. The reduction will be there. I mean, just think about, I'm just thinking about retail right now, right? Can AI really remove all the jobs within retail? I don't see it very likely. People still want the human touch, right?
oh
You think
yeah.
about, you go to Sephora, right? And I don't think this matters if you're 80 years old or if you're 15 and you go to Sephora, right? You want to feel that makeup. You want to see what
Right.
it looks like on you. You want someone's perspective. You want a robot can't do that, you know what I mean? So I don't see that it's gonna completely eliminate everyone's job in every single, sector and industry. I think what it's going to do is make us work smarter and better and be a little
Yes.
bit more, not be a little bit more, be a lot more efficient, right?
Yes. Yes, it makes perfect sense to me. The efficiency is there, the streamlining is there. And I almost would pose that those who are able to still consider that going and getting an education, it's actually really important regardless of AI or not AI, for the sole reason that it has to do with thinking process as opposed to anything else. The way you would feed artificial intelligence, who's feeding that computer content and questioning, the level of sophistication in which that is done will also generate an output very different. The same that we have disparate in, outcomes when, let's say, a 5-year-old is engaging, let's say, an AI versus someone who has a doctoral degree and they have mastered all kinds of research concepts and understanding and questioning and formulation of information. So the outcomes would be different. The output by the AI would be different. So I hope people consider that they still have the opportunity to embrace it,
Mm.
and learn and not be like, oh no, I don't want to know anything about AI.
Yeah, my mom doesn't even know what the word AI means. So yeah.
You're like, "No, don't tell me, I don't wanna know," and I'm like, "Okay, this is where the generational gap starts happening, and then you wonder what happened, and you're
Right,
light
right,
years behind, but
right.
that's what it is." So thank you so much for that. So now we're gonna move into, this whole idea of, like, our voice, our influence, our purpose. So I'm gonna ask you a few questions, because I usually go into this kind of questioning, um in terms of just, can you share like a moment in your career when like speaking up about an issue changed something important? Can you think of a moment? I know it's just sometimes there are things that happen in our careers and you're like, and boom, I stood my ground and boom, I realized something, right? There are these moments in our careers sometimes when we have to speak up because somebody is like, hey, you totally missed the point of being human,
Right,
and you
right.
were forced to use your voice, not necessarily that it's a negative thing, but maybe you didn't realize that prior to that you weren't using your voice, your
Mm,
power.
mm, mm. Um, one thing comes to mind. I think about when I used to work prior to being at BNY. I worked at Credit Suisse, which was a Swiss bank, and I remember that was when I just kind of segued into technology from HR into technology, and I was in a program for high potential at the time. It was like I was an assistant vice president, and it was a program for high potential assistant vice presidents to get one-on-one coaching with a professional coach, to learn executive presence. I had a mentor who was a senior person who was, kind of sponsoring me, and the intention was when you finish this program, you get promoted to VP, right? First round, if you're in this program, you make it out successfully. And so within the program, since I had this, coach who was teaching me executive presence, we were we were just having a conversation talking, and I was using my hands a lot, which is very normal for me as a Latina to
Yeah, we do it all the time.
right. And so she was looking at me, and then I realized that I was conscious about her looking at me. And so then I went like this and I put my hands like this. And she said to me,
You are stiff.
yeah, she said, why, what happened? Like your hands just went like this. And before it was like this. What is it? And then I said to her, oh yeah, I just remembered that, one of my stakeholders, had made a comment about my hands being so distracting. And so I'm putting my hands like this. I'm just trying to remember. And she said to me, why do you feel like you have to stop using your hands? And I said to her, well, this stakeholder kind of made a comment and he said that it was very distracting and, um, I guess it's not appropriate. And she
Mhm.
said to me, yeah, it's appropriate. She said to me, I'm sure when he talks, he doesn't politely interrupt and say, hey, so and so, excuse me, I'd like to say something. He probably just blurts it out, right? Because men normally do that, she said. They just blurt it out. sometimes interrupt you and then just say whatever they have to say. And they're not going to apologize about it. They're going to just do it. And she's like, I want you to just continue to be who you are. And if that means that you use your hands, that means that you use your hands. If you pronounce a word differently than someone who's a native English speaker, then own that. That's how you say the word, and it is what it is. And she's like, I just want you to be authentically you. As long as you're professional, you can
Yes.
always be you. And so, to answer your question, that kind of gave me the empowerment
Mhm,
to not feel like I have to stop being me and stop
mhm.
using my hands, or, say a word the way someone who was, English is their first language say it. I'm
Right.
gonna say it that way because Spanish is my first language.
Right.
If I say, you know, I'm just trying to think of a word that I would say that's different, if I say, root and not route, then so be it. And if I say, my last name is Rivera and I don't say Rivera, then, just accept it. This is who I am, and I'm not going to apologize for it. And so that was my moment of like empowerment. Like, this coach gave me enough courage to say, olvídate de eso. I'm going to say what I need to say. I'm going to use my hands. I'm going to be, as long as I maintain professionalism, it doesn't really matter.
Yes, and I'm so glad you're mentioning this because a lot of people miss the point of what is executive presence. And part of executive presence begins first and foremost by owning your voice. And owning your voice means you can experience that voice, meaning that power, not only through your body language, which is a language, but also through the oral language. And I think that this is why you were able to feel very comfortable and also unlock, as opposed to be like, oh, I'm so self conscious. My God, I gotta hide. Oh no, this is shame. Oh no, this is fear. Or all of these other things that are really what make us show up inappropriately. So you're sharing something that is really up my alley and also really powerful, because often so many people think that it's about the hands and the whatever. Listen, I know exactly how to keep these two hands in place if I wanted to because I just lock them in here. And girl, I will give you the speech that you want, and those hands won't move if I want to, right? If I want to do that for you, not because that's me, right? And you can put on a show. You can put on a show. But the truth of the matter is that when we are ourselves, when we are authentic, and this is what you just basically kind of touched upon, and it's funny because you did it in a very, I'm going to say, not conventional way, but the fact that you've realized how that gave you that voice and power and influence and ownership, like, who's gonna knock you off your space when you know who you are, basically? When no one can go and say, "Oh, I'm gonna use that to shame you," or "I'm gonna use that to put you down," or "I'm gonna use that to devalue your message," which is what this woman empowered you to understand. It
Mhm.
is so unfortunate that when people have approached me, I have had to deal with the same thing. They really think it's about being stiff and being perfect and making sure that they look like robots that have no way of making a mistake. And it's like totally the opposite is very disempowering. So thank you for sharing that because our voice, our influence, and our purpose comes relevant and real for us when we own our voice, when we own our power. And this is why you can do this. You could show up whether you're wearing a fancy jacket or no fancy jacket, the hair up, the hair down, makeup, no makeup, because you own your power. And I love everything about your answer. And thank you for that. Now we're almost ready to wrap up. I'm going to ask you a few basic things here in this section about mentorship, only because, often I do these kinds of interviews in search of trying to bring people to the realization that there are other people that have gone through a path to achieve something. And, I'm sure that in your path, as you mentioned, you had the Scottish person kind of took you under your wings, under his wings and kind of like taught you. And so in that sense, that was like a mentor to
Mhm,
you.
mhm,
So that has been, I guess, a key source of how you got all this here. Now, my question is the flip side. Like, what legacy do you hope to leave through your work and leadership? And have you basically been able to pay it forward in the sense of, I don't know if at some point you've been able to have people who have been in internships or trainings or anything of that nature that you may want to share?
mhm. Yeah, I mean, I'm really big at paying it forward. So yeah, throughout my career, I've had a lot of mentees. I actually have one right now. I actually have two within the bank. So I within the bank, we always have a mentorship program. It's called a global mentoringship program. It's normally a year, but I always leave it open to the mentees that they can continue to utilize, outside of the program, they can still reach out to me. So right now I have two females who are probably mm, 2, 3 years out of school. And um, I also have someone who used to work, he was an intern within my department about 2 years ago. And although I don't formally mentor him, consistently, he does reach out to me. And actually, probably 4 months ago, he got a full-time offer, and it was very sweet because he wrote something really nice about me on LinkedIn. It was so nice. He kind of gave me accolades saying that I gave him an opportunity when he wasn't sure if he was going to get an opportunity because he didn't
Oh,
go to like a top school.
yeah.
And so he was like, you always, you didn't, I never felt like I was bothering you because I think sometimes a lot of these mentees, they reach out to people and, whoever they're reaching out to, sometimes they're they're busy, and so it comes off that they're busy, and they're either don't respond or say I'm going to respond later or something like that. And he said to me, you never brush me off. You always answer me and you always answer my questions. And so um yeah, I'm really big on paying it forward. And I'm always open to mentoring anyone. It doesn't have to be within the bank, it could be outside of the bank. I'm always happy to mentor anyone who's looking for, someone to help them get to that next level. Because sometimes it's just about building the confidence within them.
Yes, yes, and that is so true. Now I have one last basically they're kind of two prong. It's like how do you basically in this field that is always constantly changing because your field is like ever evolving, like you never stop. But how do you stay grounded, like, and not like lose your cool? Because it's like what was good today, maybe next week is not as great because
Mhm.
the advances that are happening so fast,
Mhm.
but you have to have some kind of practices or something that grounds you, I would imagine. If you would please share a little bit of how, in this whole kind of like fast moving pace, um, field and worlds that we're living in, what are some of those things that you do to ground you and to stay focused and inspired and
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things is I'm always upskilling myself. Although I vowed that I was never going to go back to school to do another bachelor's or a master's degree, I vowed that I was always going to upskill myself. And that's really important. No matter if you work in technology, medicine, HR, it doesn't matter where you work, right? I think it's important to always upskill yourself. What do I mean by that? Read articles, take courses, get certifications. You want to be the most knowledgeable that you can in your area and be marketable, right? Because you're going up against a lot of people. When you apply for a job, you're not the only one applying for that job. You're going up against 10, 15, 20, sometimes 100 candidates, depending on your field. And so what's going to differentiate you from everybody else? The continuous learning, but also it it's like a breath of fresh air, right? Because it helps you to feel confident, right? Prepare. I I'm always preparing. And what do I mean by that, right? Um, you know, prepare if you're gonna be, if you're gonna have an interview, right? Prepare, learn a little bit about, the organization where you're, gonna interview, right? Just continue to stay abreast of trends and but also have fun with it, right? It's not all work, 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 right? Yeah, keep myself, I always upskill myself within technology, but I, I learn about things that maybe don't pertain to my job that are in technology that are interesting to me. Like, for example, for some reason, I know this might be like a little geeky. I'm really, really interested in like databases and
Mhm,
database modeling and, those kinds of things. So spend the time to kind of, you know, read other things that doesn't necessarily maybe pertain to your career, but can uplift you as like a human being. I love self-help books, so I'm always reading. I'm very fascinated about relationships and self-help books, so I'm always reading about you know, um, how I can make a relationship better and also, any kind of self-help, like, whether it be a breathing technique or, how to pray better, whatever it may be. I always want to upskill myself professionally, but also personally, right? Because sometimes we only focus on one,
mhm,
can't just focus on one. I think all around, you have to focus on how can I be better tomorrow? Even if
mhm,
it's just small increments.
mhm, mhm. On that note, what's one book or a quote or something that, basically that you have been reading that has become maybe something that fuels your mindset, because I mean that's nice. I love all self-help books too. Like what's something that or an author, a book that
So
that was like impactful.
yeah, I just read this book. I think it's called Eight Great Dates or something like that. Eight
Mhm,
Great Dates. I don't remember the author, but it's basically a relationship book about whether you're married or you're in a relationship. And it talks about um when you're dating someone, trying to find out and making sure that your core values are aligned. And I never knew that before, to be,
mhm,
which is mind boggling to me. I've read like Five Love Languages, which I love by Gary Chapman, and I've read so many relationship books, but I've never thought about making sure that the person that you're with, you guys are aligned on your core values. And it just makes so much sense because if you're
mhm,
not aligned on your core values, this author basically says that you're probably not going to have a successful relationship and you need to be aligned on your core values.
mhm. I would love to know. Is it Eight to Great?
Can I get the book? Would you mind? I have it.
Yeah, go get it. Go
All
get
right.
it, please. Yeah, I just don't want to give the wrong.
Okay.
Eight Dates.
Eight Dates.
Mm-mm, never heard of this book.
And this is by this gentleman named John Gottman. And
Yes.
him and his wife. So I read his first book, which was Seven Principles of Making a Marriage Work.
Mhm.
And him and his wife have done, I think it's 20 years of research on
Mhm.
relationships.
I love it.
I'm
I'm
so
actually gonna read this book.
It was excellent. I'm so glad because let me just tell you, this was a friend of mine who recommended it, as her and her boyfriend were doing it together. So this is like so the point of me reading this book is I was dating someone and I had said to him, "Let's do this together." And he said, "Yeah." We wind up breaking up, but I read the book anyways, and it was just so insightful. This is a
Mhm.
book that you keep because you'll read it over and over again
Oh,
because
I
it's
love it. I love
mind-blowing
it.
stuff.
Thank you for
Yeah,
sharing that, you see?
yeah.
Oh, Renee, thank you so much. I feel like this has been such a wonderful journey, and I hope you've enjoyed,
I have. I
this interview. I know that it's your first time with me in terms of doing these types of things, but I wanted to make sure that I could expose some of your great work because I think we need more of that. We need to let other people just get a little window into how things are getting done, how things are being achieved, and also to know possibility that it's something that you can build yourself in a career, especially your career is so unique with these different areas that otherwise are not as common, especially for Latina women.
Mhm.
So let me just kind of basically give our listeners their closing. Thank you, Renee, for sharing your story, your strategies, because you gave us a few, and your heart with us today. Your journey reminds us that leadership isn't just about systems, it's about people, purpose, and the courage to innovate with integrity. To our listeners, your voice matters, your leadership matters, and your story has power. Until next time, speak boldly, lead wisely, and connect deeply. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Lorilet.